All right, so now we're good. Yes.
Yep.
All right, thank you. All right, as I said, ES6. So now we're starting at the ES6 now. We're going to go through a little bit of evolution a little bit. And as we said, we may already know it, but we can look at it in a different perspective now since we have about a month, which is probably translating, I thought about it, about 50 hours of JavaScript now. So yes, we can get into this stuff now. All right, so we're going to talk about evolution of JavaScript, main goals of JavaScript. Now we can compare what we learned and kind of look at the new ES6 syntax. Again, it's just a specification. It's just a deluxe version of JavaScript. And again, you have to be very mindful that in order to use this modern syntax, you need browsers that are modern. I might have told you before, I got in situations where I didn't have that, and ES6 code broke everything. So if you are working on your own project, perfectly fine. If you're working on in an internal software house, like a banking financial institution or something like that, they may support old versions. ES6 won't work. So you can't not use the deluxe features. You have to learn vanilla JavaScript, which we've spent about last week, which translates to about 12 hours a week, 50, 60 hours. We've already learned vanilla JavaScript. So a good foundation. So we already know this, but I'll talk about it anyways again. ECMA is the standard, much like the W3 Web Consortium for HTML and CSS. JavaScript's high level, dynamic, untyped. As we know, it's pretty dynamic, untyped. It has all those crazy things going on with variables and overwriting and all of that. Basically, it's interpretive programming language created originally for browsers, originally for the web browser, but we will be learning the mean stack, MERN stack, mean and MERN. Mean is Mongo, Express, Angular, and Node. We're not learning that stack because we're not learning Angular. Angular is a little bit harder to learn. We're learning the piece with React. So you haven't seen those pieces yet because we've spent time on JavaScript, but we will be learning in full stack 3 and 4. It'll be the MERN stack, which is Mongo DB, which is the database, which is Express, which is the middleware kind of API layer, and Node.js is a server, and React, and it'll all be based around JavaScript, from web browser UI to server to database, and we'll all be using JavaScript, which is why we spent so much time on it, because there's no going to be flipping between languages, which is really nice. Then you can just focus on the technology. And that's a big bonus, right? It's really bonus. Anyhow, ECMA International, we already talked about. If you didn't know, if you missed it the first time, it's a nonprofit standard, right? We have ECMA script, scripting language specification standardized by this group, ECMA International. So implemented well-known languages such as JavaScript, JScript, and ActionScript. If you don't know what ActionScript was, I believe that was Flash. ActionScript, if you don't even know what Flash is, it was like the web's first attempt at kind of like animation and plugins and videos. It was, I took a college course on that. I remember driving down there. I spent 3 classes. I didn't come back. So it dealt with keyframes and yeah, it was really clunky. I didn't like it. So, but that is an older technology. So ES 2015, which should be ECMAScript, ES 2015, ES6. You'll hear those quite a bit. The newest version of ECMAScript. Now let me check that for 1 second there, just to make sure, just in case. ES6 alternative name. Let me see my Google. So ES6, ES 2015. Right. Okay. Not to confuse you, just to make sure you get that right. ES, and I'm repeating it for a reason. You'll know why later. So evolution of this JavaScript. So you already learned about ECMAScript, but evolution. So I don't know if we went through this, but if we didn't, we're going to go through it again. So 1995 Netscape. Yeah, we already did that. We showed that original version of Netscape probably. Creates Mocha. Mocha becomes LiveScript, becomes JavaScript. At that point in time, ECMA adopts it. And then on the horizon comes this version of ES1. Then ES2 the next year, followed by ES3. ES3 had some interesting things in it called regex, which is regular expressions, and then try-catch. So try-catch is part of error handling, and we haven't learned that yet. That's up in the next session. I want to make sure that we know how to use try-catch. And finally, and how to handle some errors and exceptions. Yes, that's very important. And then if you didn't know, in 1990, there was a browser war. If you didn't know this, maybe before your time, IE versus Netscape. And that was Microsoft. Microsoft was the monopoly. Microsoft was taken to high court, Supreme Court, and I believe, I forget exactly how it all went. They weren't forced to break up, but they I guess they got some. They lost that case because what they were trying to do is they were packaging Windows. I remember this. Windows in that package that everybody was using, the software operating system. There was only one, and it had as a part of it Internet Explorer. So therefore, they basically pushed out the competition completely, right? Netscape at one time owned the internet, and then here comes this giant mega software tyrant kind of thing. I'm for Microsoft, but at the time they pushed the little guy out by, if you want to use our Windows operating system, you have to use our browser, and you have to, it basically crushed Netscape completely, to the point where they're no longer around anymore. That's what it looked like. I remember that little button there, Netscape Navigator now. It was like that little graphic, right? Or Microsoft was like that, IE. Again, now we look at that, it's kind of laughable, right? And we'll know why. I mean, when we kind of tongue-in-cheek, we kind of talk about IE, nobody wants to support it. But, even Microsoft itself came out with Edge, Microsoft Edge, right, as a replacement to IE. I still have IE 11 installed at my workplace because we do have to flip over and look at it sometimes. And then when you get these specific IE bugs, you just kind of cringe because you got a tailor code for this. And then you go to the metrics and you realize that, hey, maybe a small segment, like less than 1%, use ES6. So therefore, we're not going to fix those bugs, right? There's a lot to say, but okay, so there's this browser war, and then IE wins. Microsoft won, become the dominant browser at that time. They owned the internet at that point. They had a monopoly. There wasn't a lot of innovation happening at that time during that power struggle, especially in JavaScript. There wasn't a lot of JavaScript had been established, and there wasn't really much need for change at that time. I can remember 1990, the web was static. You had those static pages, information traveled fast, but you just had, and that was high tech, right? To be able to get information at your fingertips was pretty incredible. Like I might have mentioned before, I used to be a wrestling fan when I was growing up, and I remember I had to call the Toronto Star hotline to get the wrestling results from 48 hours ago. And I remember when, I don't know, whatever federation, you could get it at Monday at midnight. You refresh your browser and you get the news results that day, a couple hours after. And it was incredible. It was, if you've grown up in this era now, like you couldn't even imagine that kind of thing would be possible, but it was, data flowed very slowly. You didn't know things right away. You had only your TV or radio. You didn't have this constant stream. But the innovation at that time was slow because the web had been established. Static pages were what everybody had, and that's what the CPUs at the time provided, and that was a huge technology, innovation, right? So, but then Gmail was launched in 2004, and because of Gmail, it was very popular. One of the first popular web applications to really show off what was possible with JavaScript. I remember when it came on the scene. I still have a Yahoo account. Can you imagine that? I have a Yahoo account from when I signed up with it originally. I picked a stupid name. I don't even know what I picked. It was like some and I'm still stuck with that email address to this day. Like 20 years later, I'm still stuck with it. People still email me. I can't close it down, and it's ridiculous. It makes no sense. But I remember Yahoo was the big deal. It was static kind of interface. And then the original Gmail, I remember, came out, and it had a lot of like interactivity to it, right? Original Gmail. In 2004 probably looks pretty funny right now, but it was I don't know if we can even see it, but it probably looks similar, similar kind of interface. But at the time, it was a big deal, right? That was, you can see it here. That's what it looked like 12 years ago. We had links on the side. We had some things updating, but that was a big deal. That was, you could flip. I don't know if you could flip through pages, but when we look at that now, we think we could probably build that. But at the time, they were leveraging JavaScript quite a bit. And it was quite a departure from what we had. All right, so hold on. I think if there was a question, I don't know. I can't see it. There was a question or a comment. Can I see it? Pokemon creator, good old days. Yeah, you had to do invites from Gmail to set up stuff, right? It's true. It's a long time ago. But as I remember dial-up modems, right? I remember that 24K baud analog stuff. So, and the internet would lag like you couldn't believe, right? But again, you were happy the fact that you could download a picture. It was like, or play a game over the internet. You were so impressed by this thing, right? So, but now it's laughable when you think about it. 2005, Ajax came in. So if you don't know what Ajax was that first, when broadband became popular, meaning there was more power, more internet, then we could do more things, right? Because we were limited by those smaller modems. We couldn't do much. So that Ajax came on the scene. Asynchronous stands for asynchronous server requests. Ajax, that was the big deal. The fact that you could send a server request asynchronously. My gosh, what a crazy jump in technology, right? Asynchronous JavaScript and XML, right? So at that point in time, there's like a renaissance of JavaScript. Now, because of this asynchronous server requests, now we started seeing some changes in JavaScript, right? jQuery came on the scene. Again, this is kind of like showing some libraries started to come on the scene. Some of them died. I read an article the other day. I got to post it. It's like the brutal life cycle of JavaScript frameworks and libraries, and it is brutal. It's like there's a huge adoption rate, and then it dies because the next one comes out. And it's true. I mean, at this point in time, React, we'll talk about all this stuff again, but React is kind of the winner, but Angular at one point was very popular, still is, but they dropped the ball a little bit on their release, but and it hurt them. But anyhow, jQuery at one time, if you knew jQuery, you were gold, right? Again, it's kind of laughable now to think about it. We look at jQuery as, it's just a library, but at one time, if you knew it, it was like, brand new. That guy's an expert in this library. My God, he has all this experience. Countless libraries emerged because of this, helping with the Ajax requests and the DOM operations. Right now, we could manipulate the DOM. We could get some asynchronous calls, and what asynchronous means is you don't have to load a page up we're going to get into asynchronous JavaScript in a little bit, but kind of context is you don't have to do things one step at a time. You don't have to load a page and wait until it's loaded and then do something else and then do something else. You can kind of fire all those things all at once, asynchronously at the same time, and then you can build very dynamic stuff, right? You're not staggering how things are running, right? So a bunch of other ones: Scriptaculous, Mood Tools, EXTJS. These died, right? They're dead. And Validate, there's whole many libraries I've used, and they're not supported anymore. They're replaced, right? That was 2005. So 2006 and 2009. So then we started seeing different versions of ECMAScript. One was abandoned, then one came out. It was 5, so you can see how it skipped a version completely. What was important there was JSON, right? Not Jason, Jason, like in Friday the 13th, but JSON. You'll see that quite a bit. Really what that is, if you remember, okay, so if you remember, we'll explain more when we get into server-side code, but when we pass data around, data used to be in very heavy formats, right? XML, SOAP, these kind of things. However, everybody understands JavaScript, so they came out another protocol which is called JSON, JavaScript Object Notation, which is really like an object literal that we've learned already. Object, it's a JavaScript object, very lightweight, very fast across the network, a very slick protocol. If you look at that protocol, it's just text with these JSON objects, so it's very fast compared to, I wish I could show you, I'll have to find an example. SOAP. SOAP is a protocol that uses XML. Man, oh man, that's heavy. It's basically tag after tag after tag of, like, if you can recall HTML, you could recall a little bit what XML might look like, tag based. So you have a lot of extra padding to your messages, right, going across the network. So JSON was a big push there. So then in 2009, it seems like it's new, but it's a long time ago still, 10 years. Server-side JavaScript, that was a big deal, right? I mean, to this day, like, it's pretty groundbreaking, and there's not a lot of, I mean, there are emerging jobs, but the market, I'd have to see the breakdown of the market. Server-side is a hard one to bust because of the dominance the other ones have, like Microsoft, but Microsoft, Oracle, people like that, you know, I mean, they have kind of they've basically been in the game for like 50 years, almost. No, 50 years? No, not 50 years, 30 years anyways, at least, yeah. Right, so server-side coding, but then Node.js came out. Node.js is all about JavaScript, kind of coding in JavaScript, event-driven. We're going to learn that in our next session. So that emerges. So now you have a situation where you have JavaScript on the front end, the UI, the interfaces, but now you have JavaScript on the server side, which is crazy, really. The fact that you can write JavaScript on the server still blows my mind. And then they took it a step further in that they had databases like that you could write to with JavaScript in libraries, and you store internally those JSON objects. So then you have a fully connected system that is truly all JavaScript, and it's quite the sight, really. When you look at other different types of breakdown of applications and their architecture, it's certainly is nice to be able to just focus on the technology and not worry about constantly switching all the time between languages. So now we're getting more relevant. We're getting past 2010. Now there's not really libraries anymore. Now there's these entire frameworks that start to, they start to really emerge, right? Frameworks are evolving because why? Because JavaScript, we already learned, is so open, flexible, and dynamic that people just started making their own languages up on top of it. They just basically started building these big frameworks around it. They continued to evolve, and no longer were they just DOM helpers like we've learned last week, not just Ajax helpers. They have full systems, right, about state management, all this stuff. It's kind of crazy, really, internals of it. Then you had packet managers. We're going to learn about NPM and these packet managers in the next session. Pretty cool stuff. Basically, you can use it to install freeware basically anywhere. I mean, it's not a new concept. There is concepts of these types of thing already, like NuGet, and but they're kind of like, based in those kind of technologies, not JavaScript based. But this is a JS packet manager. So basically, all those tools that are out there, they started making them all in JavaScript. so that you have a fully running environment, all in JavaScript. All the tools are built in JavaScript. You know, everything is designed so that you can stay with this, right? Solutions keep coming in, modules, like solutions for keeping code in modules, right? Modules, you'll learn those. Node.js, Browserify. So yeah, I forget Browserify was Node.js in the browser, I believe. You could build Node. I haven't really looked at that one. That's an interesting one though. Node.js packets, you can run them in the browser going the opposite way. It's kind of crazy too. You know, JavaScript preprocessors. So these preprocessors are like, they compile down code and do a bunch of stuff with builds and all that stuff. The build system now is built with this stuff. So, you know, if you don't have context to this stuff, if you're working on a like I've been through the Microsoft hierarchy or not hierarchy, technology stack for over a decade, they have all their own tool sets, right? They have Visual Studio, which is a licensed, very expensive professional tool that usually the company buys for you. You get a license, right? You got it, and then you have SQL Server, which is another professional like license, and then you have some other types of things like their, you know, Microsoft Teams, but other things to manage. I forget what the code base. I forget what it's called again. Something to manage their code. Anyhow, they had all their build tools, all their compilers, all that stuff already built. You have a technology stack that you have to pay for to use to program in there. You know, they basically created all these pieces of the puzzle in JavaScript, and it's like free. This stuff's all free, like Webpack. There's not really, like, you can grab this stuff and use it for free. I mean, I'm sure there's ways that they can get support, but it's not like you got to pay these gigantic licenses for this stuff. So yeah, you can see Angular, React, there's a bunch of other ones. NPM, we're gonna learn that. Node Package Manager, I forget what that guy is here. Grunt, these things are like, they all have their own. There's so many different things out there. And again, they live a very short life cycle, some of them. Some of them take over, very popular for years. So anyhow, I want to quickly show this. Okay, well, we already know this, right? We'll get back to that in a second, but
Mike, I have a question.
yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Is it possible to perhaps go like one or two slides back?
Certainly. Certainly. So we're going back. 1, 2, this one here.
One more, the
Yeah.
one, this one. So it's certainly very nostalgic, you know, going through all of these frameworks. What I basically want to understand is, out of all of these, so are these like completely replaced with the ones that are much more popular now, or do these have features that are basically for accomplishing a particular task and they have their own way and they are used in some certain use case? Like what is like the take on these? So is jQuery like completely obsolete now? Is it
It's interesting you should say that. jQuery is really, really, really good at what it does, and that is using selectors, right? It's like CSS selectors. It's very good at what it does. I thought, now I've worked on various projects where they would consider jQuery older. And then I went to a new place that the current place now is very, very, very modern and very high tech, has React, has all those newer things. And what do I find when I get in the new React stuff? I find jQuery in the middle of it. People would say you shouldn't use it, but everybody reverts back to it because it's really good at what it does. But it only does so much. It's a library. It just selects. It's basically, now we use it for selecting by style, using all the selectors and then kind of applying things. And we kind of just use it for that. We don't use it anything more, but it's still really good at that part of it. But the newer technologies are more powerful, but you could still build interfaces with jQuery for sure. You can. It's a quick library. Some of these other ones are obsolete. Like jQuery is one that's been around for a while. It's still very, very heavily used. jQuery mobile is for mobile devices. That's done. That's out of there. These other two, I can't even tell you I've seen it anywhere. So
okay?
Yeah.
Follow-up question, right?
Yeah.
So from all of these technologies, I mean, so we'll be doing MERN stack in this particular course, but from you as a seasoned and experienced developers, would you recommend that we should probably consider going through any other of these frameworks as well in our own spare time, which could help
Yeah.
doing?
Like,
Mhm.
yeah, Ajax is async. That's kind of like a technology thing that's pretty popular. I mean, you're gonna get various asynchronous JavaScript now, so you don't really need to go through it. jQuery for sure. I would say learn jQuery. It's gonna help you. You can use it anywhere at any time. So, like I said, I thought it was, and I was like, if I get to some newer stocks, they're probably not gonna. I'm not gonna see jQuery anymore. And then right in the middle of it, it's everywhere. I was like, you're kidding me. And people are like, it's good at what it does. So I would say yes, jQuery for sure. Um, I'll let you know if there's any other ones. But at the end of the day, vanilla JavaScript is your biggest bet. Some people revert back to jQuery because it's easy, but you can do everything that you want with those selectors we learned, right? But still, I would recommend that.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, it's a tricky business. It's like these frameworks are like the flavor of the month. They keep changing on you. It's when you're working in technology, it's a fickle path because not every they keep changing things. I'll give you a quick example of that before we get. I know I'm talking about a lot of stuff, but I got into a situation where I was in a job and they were rewriting something and I was getting a chance at learning Angular JS. And I was like, I'm set. I'm going to be an Angular JS contractor. It's hot. I'm going to ride this wave and for the next 10 years and I'm going to do well and up my rate and all that stuff. Then React comes out and then Angular 2 comes out and Angular 2 is copying React and they totally rewrite everything completely basically change everything to the point where everything I learned in Angular JS, I can't translate it anymore really, unless I get on an older project. So these things are so fickle, they change every I don't even know anymore. It's like 2 years to 5 years. It's just there's always something else coming out. So somebody told me once, learn your JavaScript basics, which we've spent a month on. Learn some type of um, server-side object-oriented programming like C# or Java, and then learn SQL Server, and you're going to be good with those. 1 second, I'm going to pause it because it's starting to rain and I got to shut my window. All right, that's what happens when you're live. It was really warm outside. Now it's raining. It's pouring. It's crazy. It's raining. So anyhow, yeah, getting back to that. Learn your JavaScript. Learn your server-side object-oriented programming. Learn some type of database like SQL Server. Then you can go anywhere and you can basically learn anything. If you have a basis in JavaScript, then you can pick up these other things. Too many people, too many new junior developers will just grab onto the hottest uh, the hottest framework and only learn that framework, and then they have no clue how to do JavaScript on its own, and it's hard for them to change, right? So fickle business, technology, it changes. I'm sure with blockchain it'll change as well. Hold on, I just want to get back to this. So anyhow, I wanted to show this quick graphic at first. I'm talking a lot here, but it's probably worth it. So this is a cool site. I should post this. Evolution of the web. If you look at this, it's going to show you the evolution of the web in it's very nice here. What the average user doesn't see is the interplay between web technologies and browsers. Over time, web technologies evolved to give developers the ability to create generations of useful and immersive experiences. Technologies like HTML, CSS, all this for web browsers. So anyhow, if we click this, you'll see the evolution of the web. It's a nice graphic. So you can kind of see here as things are going, how they're looking today. So it's interesting, really. If you really look at this, and maybe you can look at this in a different, on your own time. But if you go way back to what we're talking about here, way, way, way back, right? You can see here, and I can highlight like HTML. You can see the different versionings that are happening over time that we're talking about. You can also see the browsers itself, like Netscape. You can see Opera, and you can see Internet Explorer come on the market. And you can see the various trends. Like, you know, at one time JavaScript, you could see it dipping there, right? It dips and then it explodes upwards. Flash just basically died, slow death, right? But you'll notice at this point of explosion, you know, what happened, right? So what happened at this point here was mobile devices came on, you know, Pocket Internet Explorer was released. Okay, that was a reason for, it was like a mobile Pocket Internet Explorer on Windows. Okay, not sure about that, but anyhow, you can see here over time, that's 1990, there's still different technologies are taking off. Ajax explodes because it's a server-side, asynchronous server-side requests. Now the context of that is way back with the static web, we had server-side rendered pages. So if you worked on, say, ASP Classic, or I forget the other one, it was Cold Fusion, these things were generated from the server, right? There's not much interaction from the browser. And then they came out with Ajax, where the technology, you could do kind of asynchronous calls to the back end. But again, the interfaces were all generated from the server. Like, for instance, web forms. All of that is generated from the server. Then it renders out the HTML to the browser. It's a very heavy payload, and there's a lot of talking to the back end all the time. And so anyhow, that exploded. That helped. I remember working on that stuff. You can see here, Ajax, and then it died. It started really dying. I'm sure if you look at this, you'll see the point in time that, so then things start to kind of calm down a little bit here. Right, you can kind of see there. Sorry, I need to minimize this a little bit because you probably can't see it as well as I can, but right, so then you can kind of see again where we're hitting here. Then there's a massive, massive explosion here at around 2010. You can see all that noise where, you know, all these technologies start taking off here. You can see them all, HTML5, CSS transitions, right? CSS, okay, HTML5 comes on the scene. Sorry, you'll have to play with that. Anyhow, what happens at this point in time, which is around 2010, you can see right around here, iPhone is released. The first iPhone is released in 2008. And because of that, because of that popularity, right? You can see here, Firefox version mobile released. Because of the mobile devices being released, now server-side Ajax, heavy payloads, they don't work anymore. There was a huge increase in dynamic, lightweight, responsive UIs. And in order to do that, you needed to go to these languages that provided that. And you can see the trend for these other languages started dipping at this time, and the explosion with these types of touch screens. You can see touch events up here. Come on. Well, it kind of dips down, but anyhow. Yeah, you can see what's going on here. Like, there was a massive event that happened, and there was a couple events that happened, but one big one was when the first iPhone was released, and then everything else changed the whole paradigm of everything at that point in time. I can't see if anybody else has their hand up, but if they did, okay. Nobody does, okay. But anyhow, that's a good graphic. While I'm talking to you right now, I will throw it into the Slack channel just because I'll forget, to be honest, right beside this Kung Fu guy. All right, so I'm taking it down. I'm taking it down memory lane a little slower than I thought, but let's get to a little bit of syntax here. Okay, we'll keep going here. But it's interesting to me. I like this stuff. I like talking about this stuff because there is a big trend that happens. And there's a reason why we're learning JavaScript in the way that we're learning it. We already know the pros and cons already, but if you don't know JavaScript, it's easy syntax. Number one, it's easy compared to other languages. Functions are objects, which is a good thing. Native, the only native web browser language is another good thing. It's native to the browser. It's independently driven. It's independent. So again, it's not driven by the big guys at Microsoft. It's not driven by Facebook or Google. It's independent. So they keep upping their spec as they see what's happening. Like Google and Facebook, or Google runs Angular, if you don't know. Facebook runs React. As they start to see what they're adding, slowly JavaScript itself tries to adopt these things to maybe one day JavaScript itself will be used for everything. So completely, they're trying to keep up, right? That's why the different specs keep coming. That's why you got to keep up with, what version am I on? What DOM level am I on, right? There's so many things you got to consider. But there are cons, right? As we know, not a lot of clean code practices. There's a lot of bad code to make up for the quirkiness we know of, like hoisting and all that stuff. Each framework equals a new practice, enforcing bad practices all overall, right? Sometimes these frameworks, you got to learn some other stuff. It's not really best practice, but it works in that framework. Rapid development often makes tools and frameworks obsolete fast. So there are some cons. I mean, what that point is like when you're working with Microsoft, say .NET, is the versions are very slow, but when you get a version, it's totally solid, and it's like, maybe they have a patch here and there, but the increment between C# 4 and 5 is a stable version, and it's got lots of new features, but it comes out slowly. But when you get it, it's a whole upgrade across the board. So you can kind of give them trust that it's going to be done right. So why should we learn all that vanilla JavaScript that we learned in the last month? Well, the reason why I spent so long there is because I know that if you can master those fundamentals, then the only challenge you need to worry about when you take on a framework is, right, when learning the new framework will be scoped to their syntax, right? So we just need to learn their new syntax. We have a good base. We just need to learn what they're doing differently and then adjust, right? We don't have to go back and learn what a for loop is and things like that. So if we understand JavaScript's core principles, if we want to build, it's important, right? If you want to learn, if you want to have a decent career, you need to know JavaScript. There's no way around it. Unless you want to be totally a server-side developer, or maybe you want to be a blockchain developer, that's fine. But knowing how to integrate some pieces will definitely help you, right? And chances are, if you're going to integrate some blockchain app or something like that, it's going to be a web app, and probably you're going to use JavaScript, so it's in line, right? Another thing is past 5 years, more than 10 frameworks made the news. It's totally true. They just keep coming out. I'll send you a list. It's like we only talk about the ones that are popular. There's so many other ones that are just come out and don't go anywhere. So it's, how many more are going to keep coming? Who knows? Angular and React are big now. I guarantee you some other one will come out. Maybe Microsoft will buy Vue.js, which is another one, and that will be the next one. Or maybe Elon Musk will buy his own framework, and then he'll just crush everybody, right? So it's true here. This is a true statement. jQuery developers are trying to catch up on Angular tomorrow. Angular developers will try to catch up on React and Vue. Then we'll be trying to catch up on the next technology advance. It's always true, right? I have to tell you, at one time, I was not good at JavaScript. In fact, I needed to spend a lot of time to get good at it. And because I kind of grew up in the server-side technologies of .NET, and I realized as part of myself that I need to upgrade my technologies. So I need to throw myself into this. And to be honest, there are guys that are better than me at JavaScript because they are totally front-end developers. This is a full stack course. Now they're Their whole mindset is just front end. They don't want to. I know guys who don't even want to touch some of the stuff that we're gonna work on, such as databases. They don't. It's like they have a allergic reaction, and they just say, I don't know how to do it. I don't know, and because they don't want to touch it, because they want to stay only with the fancy UI, right? And that's their prerogative. But anyhow, I like this one, vanilla JS. So vanilla JavaScript refers to using just plain old JavaScript, which we've been learning without any libraries like jQuery, without any frameworks, right? And then we looked at this Napoleon Dynamite. I don't know if you ever saw it. Maybe it was quite funny, but this was a good quote. Maybe switching to insert framework will compensate for my lack of knowledge in JavaScript, says the front end developer, right? It's just like, oh, this isn't working, so let's just switch it, right? I don't understand how to use Angular anymore. Oh, React is hot. Let's go to that. I have no idea how to do JavaScript, but let's just take on the new framework, right? It's true. It's very true. I've met people like that. So over time, again, we're kind of gearing towards where we're going. So we're going to be looking at a framework soon when we get to React, right? So we'll probably talk about this. This session, to be honest, is probably introduction to JavaScript, or right before I taught Angular and React. So this is already talking about that, but I might as well just, give you this timeline. We may circle back to it and come back to it and look at it again, but anyhow, we might not have to, right, after this. So we already looked at that evolution of the web, but you can see there, it's, so I remember in 2004 using Dojo. Dojo was a validation tool, and that's dead. jQuery is still alive. Mood tools, I remember. And you can see as Chrome is kind of taking off, as ES6 is they're trying to keep up, Internet Explorer. Firefox, I think they're out of commission soon. They're going to cancel Firefox, but you can see AngularJS came on board. And then you can see here, Ember is still around. Ember took off, and now it's like, who knows Ember? I don't know. Bunch of other ones here. Ember 2 came out. Angular 2 came out. Like, it's kind of ridiculous, really. It's hard to keep up. But you have to, right? You have to keep up. All right, so after all of that talk, at least I will show you some new features here of ES6. So, all right, so ES6, the common goal of ES6, they wanted to fix ES5 problems. You don't know about ES5 yet, but you may have already learned some of those built-in library methods we use are part of that. Backwards compatibility. So Babel is a compiler. So Babel translates ES6 code to make it valid JavaScript, right? So when we are using this special syntax, just know that there's a compiler that runs. At the end of the day, it converts it back to vanilla JavaScript for the browser to understand. So they're creating a language, a syntax for us to make it easier to write JavaScript. But at the end of the day, it gets translated back down to that stuff we learned previous to this, right? It's modern syntax, so they try to give you keywords like this, class, things like that to make you think in your head like you're coding C# or Java, which is an object-oriented programming language, plus stuff to help us make life easier. Again, it's like a deluxe version. You have to look at your browser's compatibility, and if you have it, then you can take on this modern syntax, right? Very suited for bigger, complex applications, and the new features are in a standard library. Native class support, arrow functions, all that stuff. All those nice things. So I don't know, I keep getting this highlight. I don't know why it's highlighted unless it was somebody asked a question, but I can't see it, sorry. So that's the main goal. So now we're finally looking at the syntax, okay. All right, so we have danced around this statement. I haven't used let too many times, but basically let allows a block scope for a local variable. So we had that problem with var, and to be honest, I hate using that var keyword anymore. It's just, if I can avoid it, I do. I either use the constant or the let. So the let gives a bit of a block scope. As you know, right here in our problem statement here, on this side here, we had the var in the global scope, and then we had the var in the inner scope, and then, you know, we have, maybe if we didn't define it, we can overwrite this one. So we have a situation where we just can blow away our scope, right? However, with the let statement will actually keep it contained. And when it says block scope, it means that it's contained within its own small expression. So it kind of allows these things to happen, right? You can define it out here and it'll respect that outer scope. Also, you can assign it in here and it'll respect the scope that it is in. So in here, it's just this little tiny if statement, this if block. So it gives a block scope, which eliminates the craziness of this var keyword, right? So that's one thing that is huge, right? So you can actually do this assignments and you can respect all of your different types of scope. The one thing I like about it, the next one is called the const statement. So you probably see me use this a lot because this drives me crazy with JavaScript and I use this anytime I can. With that var keyword, as we learned, we can overwrite everything. But if you give it a constant, you can't overwrite it anymore. You're basically saying that this is like it's not read only. I signed it once. It's not going to let any other developer overwrite it. So the constants are also block scope, but much like variables defined using the let statement, you cannot change it through reassignment and it cannot be redeclared. So if you define it once, if you try to assign it somewhere in your code, right, it's going to give you this error message, which is great. It basically locks it down for you so that you cannot assign it. Again, special syntax. Most browsers may not support this, but if you're using a modern browser, you can use it. And this solves a lot of problems that we talked about in terms of JavaScript and how dynamic it is, right? That's a lot to take in for sure. Let's at least look at this for a second here. All right, so where am I at? I am at where am I here? Sorry, my examples, yes. Constant and let. So if we have constant and let, I believe, let's take a look at this guy here. In our REPL right here. Stay with me here. Let me see. Copy paste. Can I copy paste? I don't even know if I can copy paste here. Copy paste. All right. So I'll cut this out for a second here. So I don't know why I have test defined. So basically I'm saying let name equal to John, and then basically I can allow it to be, so this one works like var, right? Let equal to John, so I can overwrite him. However, if I change this to a constant, if I actually change this to a constant here, it'll give me an error that I cannot overwrite name at all. So that's what I want, right? However, if I wanted to, I can give it a let. If I wrap this inside of a if statement, you know, if true, let name equals to Jack, right? And if I output Jack at this point, console.log name, and I don't, so if I change this here and I leave this guy, we can run this, just say Jack and John. So inside of here, it respects that guy. If we change this to var, what happens there? If we define it as var, let's see what will happen. It'll be Jack and Jack, see? So that's a problem because I don't want that to happen, right? This is the global scope. Now inside of this block statement, I'm overwriting my global scope, which could be way up in my program somewhere. I don't want that because anybody can overwrite very important details or functions, right? So number one, I could certainly lock this down and give it a constant and say, no, you're not allowed to use name anywhere in your program. It's going to throw an error completely. Like this is a very important variable. Or you might say it's a generic variable, but I want to maintain it here. And if somebody wants to go ahead and define it again, I'll allow that here. I will allow it if they use the let keyword as well, right? So now that allows that, but it keeps the scope of that. And when this expression ends, then that goes away. This might as well be, basically that is only defined within the context of this block, right? Once it's exited out, it might as well be as if it's not even there, because then we go back to whatever this was defined up here. So those are very, very, very important pieces to use, and you're going to use them a lot, quite a bit. So I've talked a lot. Let me just quickly show a video here to explain that a little bit more, and then we will. I'm probably going to go over a little bit of my 45-minute block. That's all right, because I want to at least get through arrow functions for you, at least, so then you can do a little bit of some lab work. But let's listen to somebody talk about this ES6 stuff. This guy. Oh.
So far, we have been declaring variables using the let keyword. But at the beginning of the course, I briefly mentioned that there is another way to declare variables using the var keyword. And you may see this in a lot of JavaScript code online. In this lecture, we're going to look at the var keyword. You're going to learn about the problems with the var and why you should avoid it. So let's start by defining a function, start. Here we're going to have a loop, let I equal to 0. We're going to run this loop 5 times, and in each iteration, we're going to display I on the console. Now let's call the start function, save the changes, so we get numbers 0 to 4. Now in the last lecture, you learned that I is only accessible inside this block. So if we try to log I outside of this block, we're going to get an error. I is not defined. Now I just want to clarify something. We still have the same concept if I remove this curly braces, because here we have a single statement. So the scope of I is still this block here. Okay, so save the changes. We still get the same error. However, let's see what happens when we replace let with var. Save the changes. What happened to our error? So it turns out that I is accessible outside of this for block. So in the last iteration, I becomes 5. Because 5 is not less than 5, so the loop terminates. And here on line 6, we're displaying the current value of I. So this is the issue with the var keyword. When you declare a variable with var, its scope is not limited to the block in which it's defined. It's limited to the function in which it's defined. And this is not how most or all programming languages out there work. It's one of those weird things in JavaScript that we have had for a long time. So before ES6, var was the only way to declare variables and constants. Starting from ES6, also called ES 2015, now we have 2 new keywords, let and const, to define variables and constants. These 2 keywords create block scoped variables, but var creates function scoped variables. Let's take a look at another example. So in this for loop, let's add a code block here. Now I'm going to add an if statement. Now in the if block, I'm going to declare a variable using var, color set it to red. Now technically, in almost all programming languages out there, this variable should only be accessible in this block. But because we have used var, color is accessible anywhere in this function. So at the end of this function, we can log color, save the changes. Look, we get red here. But if we replace var with let, we get an error because color is not accessible here. And that's how most languages work. So this is the first problem with the var keyword. The second issue is with global variables. So let's delete all the code here. I'm going to declare 2 variables, one with var, color, we set it to red, and one with let. Let's say age and set it to 30. Save the changes. Now, when we use var outside of a function, this creates a global variable and attaches that global variable to the window object in browser. So in browsers, we have this window object, which is a complex object with lots of properties and methods. When you want to build front-end applications, you're going to work with this window object a lot. Now, what matters here is this var keyword attaches this color variable to the window object. So if we type window dot look, our color variable is here. In contrast, when we use the let keyword to define a global variable, that global variable is not attached to the window object. So if we type window.age, you can see it's undefined. So why is it bad to attach a variable to the window object? Well, because window object is something central, there is only one instance of the window object. And let's say you're using a third-party library. If that third-party library also has a variable with the same name, that variable can overwrite your variable. So you should avoid adding stuff to the window object. Otherwise, you're going to create all sorts of issues in your programs. Now, for a curious developer, I need to mention that when we define a function, let's say hi, this function is technically a global function and is added to the window object. So let me save the changes. If we type window.sayHi, see, our function is here, so we can call it. So technically, this is a global function. It's attached to the window object, and that is bad practice. But how can we prevent this? Well, later in the course where I talk about modules, you will learn how to encapsulate these functions in separate modules so they are not added to the window object. So here's what I want you to take away from this lecture. Avoid using the var keyword because it creates variables that are function scoped, not block scoped.
I try very hard not to use var anymore. In my day job as well as here, I don't like using it anymore, just because of all of the problems that again, that's what we had, so that's what we grew up with, right? So, but if you don't need to do it, then you don't need to use it anymore, right? So another example here is if you have an object constant as an object person, you can go ahead and you can change the properties, which is fine, but you can't reassign the object anymore. So basically you're still allowed to access those object properties. It's not going to stop you from doing that. However, if you try to reassign the whole object itself, it should throw an error saying I cannot allow you to overwrite this object anymore, right? So again, if I change it back to let would allow it because it's in the global scope. That's perfectly fine. Again, the var keyword allows you to do whatever you want, but if you want to lock it down, you just use the constant variable and you can lock it down, right? Which is awesome, really, because it reins in the Wild West here that we were learning about, right? I want to give you two more things here. I want to at least cover those so you can do at least the first question of the lab. Another really cool thing, template literals. You may have seen this syntax, but when I've been showing you examples, it pains me so greatly to type this stuff out the long way when I know the short way is so nice to do, right? So these template literals are string literals allowing you to embed expressions like a value, right? So you can use so basically it's a way of preventing this kind of thing from happening here, which we've been doing, right? So 15 is space, and then use that plus to concatenate. Then put the value in there, then plus, right? And then a space, and then a new line, not, and then a space, right? Like it's a lot of concatenation. If you've done this, you felt the pain of it a little bit. It's so much easier just to write it in this way. So if you see it there, you have these special back ticks here. So these back ticks here allow you to create like a string which you can insert. You can either insert just the value of A together, like you could have put 15 and inserted in there, or you could actually put the expression in there to be evaluated, right? Within the string. So we can do it inline to a string. It'll see this $sign in a bracket and say, oh, what's that? That must be a value to evaluate. And then it gets the result, which is 15, and puts it in there. Spacing is respected, right? And then I can do another calculation here. It calculates it and puts it in there, and their end result is a string without having to do all this crazy stuff, right? So it's slick, it's very fast, it's very nice. But remember, it's a backtick. And you got to look that up on your keyboard because it might be a new key for you, right? And you got to make sure you have those back. I forget where it is, to be honest. I'm looking at my keyboard. I can't do it fast, but I don't have that one memorized, right? I know how to use it, but anyhow, that one's a big one. So again, a newer syntax to do more with less. Another one which I really love, again, I've been trying hard to avoid it with you guys. It's called arrow functions, and these are awesome. Right now, this is a bigger example, but arrow functions are super slick. It basically allows you to, let me get rid of this pointer here. And it basically allows you to, I'll show you in a second. You don't have to type function anymore. You can just not type function anymore. I'll do a better example than this, but the arrow function has a shorter syntax than a function expression and does not have its own this arguments or super or new target. These expressions are best suited for non-method functions and they cannot be used as constructors. Okay, so basically it's a nice short form. So what that's getting at here is, if I go to my example here, all right, arrow functions. All right, so here's an example of hello, function hello, right? We can write that in the same way as inline like this. All right, so that might be a little scary to you to see it all in one line. Let's take a look at the REPL here. So if I had a very simple old function that we had, school function here, we said add numbers equals to function x and y, right? And then we do something like this, the var, the total, the sum equals x plus y. And then we wanted the console out. Okay, the backtick, I remember where it is. It's way up here. There it is. It's near this, beside the 1. Sorry, I'm using ES6 right away. Sorry. The sum is, and then I have to put like those spaces in there, and I have to put the sum, right? And then if I run that, I need to invoke it with 2 numbers, add numbers, 5 and whatever, 4 and 10. I run this. All right. Gives us 14. All right. So keeping that in mind now, we can rewrite this now. So this is the old school syntax. So now I'm going to use ES6 syntax. Firstly, I don't want anybody to overwrite add number ever again. So I'm going to put a constant variable in front of it. Add number. Secondly, I don't want to write function anymore. So what I can do is I can put this parentheses, no function keyword, x and y, and then I use this thing called an arrow like this. Internally, the compiler will know what you're doing. Internally, the compiler will see this and then put a function in front of it. So you can see already now it looks like a different expression, but it's the same thing. It's just a different way of writing it. The old way is not wrong, but this is just a cleaner way to do it, right? Or not, it's up to you, but this is the ES6 syntax, right? It's your preference. You'll see it a lot, and if you see it, that's what it is. So then when I see that sum variable, I want to lock that down as well, or maybe I'll just give it a block scope. So I'll say sum equals to x plus y. So I'm going to define this as add number 2, or yeah, add number 2, x plus y. But now I'm going to console log this, and I don't want to have to concatenate stuff anymore. So I'm going to use those template literals, right? So I'm going to put that backtick in there. All right. I say this sum is, then I just add a space. I use that $sign with the mustaches. It'll know there that I need to evaluate that. And there I'll just put the sum in there like that. I don't have to worry about concatenating. So this may not look like a big deal, but you can imagine if you needed to output like 10 things, how awful that could get. This is a quick way of preserving things. And then if I call add number 2, 5 and 10 should give me what I expect, right? There you go. So you look at the difference there. It's just a difference of syntax. So one more thing before I let you look at the lab. So we have this new syntax. You're like, well, you know, like what's the deal, right? So this is supported by the newer modern. This is JavaScript, which is what the browser understands. So we have something we were looking at yesterday called the compiler, which is called Babel compiler. So this is what runs in behind the scenes that takes your code and then runs it so the browser can understand it, the web browser, which has an engine itself, right? So if I take my code from here, which is add number, and this is the original vanilla JavaScript, right? If I paste it there, you'll see over here, it translates it to, okay, add number function. All right, that's fine, right? If I take the code I just wrote here, which is the newer syntax here, you'll see it work, right? So if I paste this in, look at how it translates it for me. It translates it for me. It puts in the var keyword because it understands that it sees the arrow, knows it's a function, and adds the function for us. Same with the let scope. Same with the template literal. It sees that syntax. It breaks it down for us, right? It does some concatenation weird stuff in there, but like you can see what I'm saying, right? Basically, it does all of this. So this is like considered like a short form or like some special deluxe syntax, right? So that's what these new features are all about. And we've only done a few, but I've talked a little bit longer, and we'll get into more of them. All right. So let me look at the lab for today. I'll post it up. You guys can get started on some of it. Take a break or whatever, because that was a long talk. All right, let me quickly just stop recording that. By the way, thank you to her for reminding me. I put up all those missing videos